Can you remember the last time you felt unqualified for something? 1 year ago this month, I was announcing my campaign to run for mayor of Chicago, and I fumbled through my launch speech. It was tough. But I stand before you today as a student, as a teacher, as a programmer, as an entrepreneur, and yes, as a former mayoral candidate, hoping that I can find somebody in this audience who wants to try that next thing even if you're not sure you're ready. But for me, my story starts back when I was in 6th grade, and I struggled. I was in the advanced math class, and I failed. I got a big fat F, and I got dropped down 2 levels to remedial math. And I remember struggling with my mom coming home with that report card and trying to figure out, what do we do about this? We know that I'm smarter. We know that I'm better than what we see on that page. And it turns out what we had to do was switch out entirely, because it wasn't about my competency. It was about the fact that there were social dynamics that were at play in that classroom that made me not feel confident to speak up. So I transferred. I went from 6th grade to 7th grade to a different school. And yes, that was me at 12, and I'm the same size now. But what changed was everything. No one knew me in that classroom. I was able to raise my hand with no judgment, with no presupposition about who I was. And I didn't feel like I was going to get bullied by either a teacher or a student. And when I was able to raise my hand and speak up, I flourished. I started running track and field. I participated in the Junior Olympics. I was one of the fastest kids in the state. I became the MVP of my football team. I started participating in chess and math tournaments, and everything just kind of skyrocketed. I ended up graduating valedictorian, all thanks to that switch. That continued throughout high school, and I earned acceptance into this great university. And here I was thinking I was about to do the same thing and be this great academic athlete. Turns out that wasn't the case. I ended up falling into the lower middle of the pack when it came to my academics and my familiarity with the content. I remember almost failing out of my very first macroeconomics class as a freshman here in 2005. Professor Gordon, please. But I eked out a C-, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to figure out a different way to make this work. So I met these 2 guys, Rishi and Derek, and they had an idea. This is freshman year. You know, I'm at Northwestern, I'm studying econ, thinking about switching to the School of Education, Social Policy. But here I was knowing that I wasn't gonna compete academically. So I had to figure out, all right, what can I do? And it turns out that this bug for entrepreneurship really struck. So they wrote down this idea on the back of a napkin to educate patients while they wait in the waiting room, to save doctors time, to make sure more patients get individualized care. That company idea became Context Media. We raised over $250,000 and built this business from the ground up while I was just this lowly 18-year-old kid from the south side of Chicago. So I remember skipping more classes, commuting on the intercampus shuttle to go downtown, to run our office and hire and fire people almost twice our age with more experience. What was I doing? What qualifications did I have to help run this business? It didn't matter, we did it anyway. That business ended up becoming Outcome Health. So their meteoric rise, they ended up becoming valued at over $5 billion. Unfortunately, I didn't stick around to keep the equity. Silly me. But regardless, I caught the entrepreneurial bug, so I kept going. Sophomore year, 19 years old, I said, all right, what other problems can I solve? I really didn't like how expensive it was for black folks to get haircuts on the south side of Chicago. So I wrote a business plan for a barbershop and helped open up 2 of them and ran this brick and mortar business, not knowing how to cut hair, never running a storefront, and feeling grossly unqualified for that journey throughout. But it didn't matter. I persisted anyway. Graduating from college, I ended up working in venture capital. With that business experience, I said, all right, maybe I can help invest in technology companies and web and mobile apps. So I experimented with it. But again, this lack of qualification reared its ugly head. And I struggled again in this room with CEOs and CTOs who were speaking gobbledygook about APIs and different JavaScript and different software tools and coding algorithms. And I said, all right, I'm helping invest millions of dollars into these companies, but yet I don't understand half the things that they're saying. Something's wrong here. So I took a year off and I immersed myself in every single programming book I could get my hands on. I taught myself how to code, design, and build web apps just to an extent where I could hack together a few systems and build a few projects. But this experience led me to realize that there was a greater problem that I was in a position to solve. There were a lot of other people in the world who wanted that same skill set that I had acquired myself to build software and solve people's problems. So I set out to teach others how to do it too. And I had this idea for a school called Code Academy. That'd be what ended up becoming the very first of the coding boot camps. But it wasn't without a major decision I had to make. A good friend of mine became the CTO for Barack Obama's re-election campaign, offered me a spot to be a product and project manager. It would have been a dream come true. I had to turn that opportunity down to take a risk on opening this school that I felt, again, grossly unqualified for, having never run a school, having only done a year's worth of computer science training personally and on my own. Could I pull this off? So I launched my school. Fingers crossed, I was trying to recruit a dozen students. I hoped that it would work. Price point was $6,000, no small order, but that's how much I needed to break even with just 10 to 12 people signing up for the program. This is about 8.5 years ago. When we launched, people from all over the world heard about Code Academy, and we had worldwide demand. So we ended up getting students from over 40 different states and 12 different countries, and they all relocated to Chicago just to learn from little old me. And I'm really proud of those outcomes. With over 2,000 students going through our program, we ended up helping them discover their passions and find happiness in new careers in software development and design. Some of our students even ended up starting multi-million-dollar businesses and raising funds. My work continued. After 5 years, I sold this company, and I continued through the nonprofit Code Now that I'm currently the CEO of, where I'm helping high schoolers from backgrounds just like my own get their start from underprivileged backgrounds and from low-income communities. I have to pinch myself when I wake up every day that this is my job, to change these kids' lives. So this is where the research comes in. So fellow TED speaker and Stanford professor Carol Dweck has done some immense research on growth mindsets and fixed mindsets to break down the emphasis that if people actually realize their potential and believe in themselves, that they have an opportunity to rejigger what's possible for them. So her research gave evidence and credence to a lot of the things that I had assumed and had learned through my anecdotal story. But it was not without a caveat. It's really important to make sure that you aren't just simply putting vitamins into ice cream when you're trying to help someone learn something, or when you're thinking about your own journey as a learner. So I'd like to also combine her perspective with another fellow researcher, Alfie Kohn, author of Punished by Rewards, among many other books. But he's contrasted with Carol's work a little bit because he focuses on the importance of intrinsic motivators over extrinsic ones, and to make sure that we aren't simply thinking about the individual's responsibility, but we're questioning the very systems themselves that are providing the education. So this is to overcome carrots and sticks that we often use as educators in classrooms, grades and punishments, and instead overriding that by understanding their intrinsic motivations. That's what's carried me through to this point. Now, I had to take things back home. This is my family. Just a snippet of them. Good luck trying to point me out in this picture. I'm in there somewhere. Now, with my family members, over 100 folks grew up on the south side of Chicago with me. And as I did a full account of all the things that I was able to do and how lucky I was with the education I received, I realized that a majority of my family members have left the city. And Chicago stands alone among the major cities as the only one with a declining population. That was shocking to me. And I know a lot of you are thinking, especially on a day like today, why do people leave? Right? It's the weather, it's taxes. Well, I'm here to tell you that I didn't know the answer. I had my own beliefs and opinions, but I did research. I interviewed over 50 individuals and families who had recently moved away from Chicago to understand their story and the causality behind their decision. And it turns out it wasn't simply the weather, and it wasn't simply their frustration with how much money we waste in their tax dollars. Those are factors, but not the trigger points or the tipping points. And instead, in talking to these individuals, I realized that people leave when they have a family that they're planning or they currently have and they're trying to figure out where they want their kid to go to school. People leave when they have a feeling of not being safe because something happened either to a friend or to themselves that triggers them to say, you know what, I can't be around this anymore, or my kid can't be around this anymore. People leave when they're seeking greater opportunities for their careers, for jobs, and affordability. That's what I learned, and that's what inspired me to step up and run for mayor, and not just wake up every day, look in the mirror, and not do something about the things that a lot of people were complaining about. This is what led me to that tough launch event. I fumbled through the speech. I could do a whole talk about what led up to this moment. It's irrelevant. What's more important is what I did afterwards. How did he handle that failure? So I got back up, and I had to do what seems simple, but actually is one of the most difficult things you can do when you're running for office in the city of Chicago, and that's get signatures to get your name on the ballot. So it turns out in Chicago, you need to collect 12,500 unique and valid signatures in order to get your name on that list. That's more than Los Angeles and New York City combined, and you only have 3 months to do it. So, as a technologist and as an educator, how do I zig when everyone zags? So I built some software. I put together a leaderboard and a gamified system so that I and my volunteers could track our progress as we hit the streets day in and day out, convincing people to take 30 seconds out of their day to sign my sheet. And as we did that, it started to work, and we collected over 18,000. Now that sounds awesome and impressive, but it was by a hair that we had enough to submit. They literally had to measure the height of the sheets that we turned in order to figure out how many we submitted. Story's not over, though. Didn't make it yet, because you have to survive a signature challenge. So we ended up having a few other candidates and campaigns who questioned the validity of our signatures. They said, we don't think the people you got signatures from are real. We don't think they're registered to vote in Chicago. So we're going to go line by line through every single one and show you the ones that we don't think are genuine and legitimate. So I ended up having to build some more tech. So we put together another system where we automated over 1,500 individualized mailers that had unique codes for the folks whose signatures were questioned to actually go to my website, meet with a notary digitally, and legally sign that they were in fact real and that was in fact their signature. Now this is an important moment because this is right around the time that I submitted my application to give this talk. And all of my legal experts and all of my campaign staffers and pretty much the press and the media all assumed that we weren't going to make it because we didn't have enough valid signatures at this point. Strangely enough, through this quixotic adventure of mine, I became the 14th and final candidate to run for mayor of Chicago this past year. And in doing so, I did the unthinkable. No one thought we would make it this far. I ended up becoming one of the youngest people to ever run for office, run for mayor in Chicago. This finally allowed me to take the gloves off. I had all these things that I was hoping to do, assuming we made it on the ballot, that I wasn't able to realize just yet. And with just over a month left to run for mayor, my emphasis was no longer on victory or trying to win. I'm not that naive. And instead, I said, how can I make the greatest dent possible and activate as many people in this city to educate them on the issues and to get them excited about what changes they're seeing or they'd like to see? So I built more software. So the first thing that I did is I said, you know what? We all make these promises as candidates, as politicians. We say all of these things. We answer lots of questions in different interviews and different outlets and questionnaires we get from different activist organizations. But who's tracking all of that? Who's aggregating all of that information? Who's putting it in a centralized, easily searchable database so that you can hold each and every one of us accountable, not just me? So I gathered all 14 candidates' answers to all the questions that had been asked during the campaign, and I made that an easily searchable resource for everyone to see. That's project one. Project number two is Chicago has a $21 billion budget, and I wanted to get to the bottom of it. I love living in the numbers. So we went through that budget line by line, and we put it into a financial model, and then we rendered it into a simplified receipt that breaks down where $100 of your tax money gets allocated in the city budget. And last but not least, we took the time to go through our policy positions to break down specifically how we plan to deliver on all the promises that we made. So we created a policy framework that I then collaborated with a few other candidates and campaigns, the winner included, to actually show how we plan to deliver on all those promises that people like to make. This allowed me, little old Neal from the south side of Chicago at 31 years old, to hold my own at the debates and at the forums in that final month. It was incredible. I had an iPad and this very sweatshirt. And I was rolling around telling people the changes that you deserve in Chicago. My goodness, was that enthralling. So, to kind of bring this all back, I have a very simple formula for how I go about my life. I identify problems, I empathize with people, and I figure out how I want to help them and how I want to serve them. I interview them to understand what progress they're seeking. I identify their desired outcomes, and I try my best to serve as that bridge, as that solution in whatever way I can. This also comes with a lot of lessons learned. I wasn't always perfect, and I very often felt unqualified to do a lot of the things that I did, but it didn't matter. I was willing to try, and that made all the difference. And this ultimately gets rooted from a values perspective. So I keep this coin on me handy. Growing up as a Cub Scout, I just do my best, and I try to help as many people as I can. So, in conclusion, I know that there's someone out there right now who's thinking about starting that next thing. I want you to pick up that microphone. I want you to put on that mask. Whether you're a hero or a villain, I will find you and I will help you because you are qualified to try. Thank you.